Awesome. Yeah. So again, welcome everybody to this artist panel talk for the screening that we put on the Cita Previa website entitled Falaciosos Superimposiciones Botánicas by Luíza Bastos Lages, Nancy D. Valladares, and Chucho Ocampo. Hopefully all of you already got to see the three beautiful videos on the website. If not, I could copy and paste that right now for you guys and definitely check them out later. But yeah, thank you guys for coming in. I'm super excited for this talk. And before I go any further, I do want to make a quick land acknowledgement to acknowledge the land that we specifically, me and Jose Luis in Chicago, the way we operate our projects. So I wanted to acknowledge that we do live in the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Padawon nations. Many other tribes such as the Miami, Hutchuk, Sauk, and Fox also call this area home. That line acknowledgement I'm referencing from the American Indian Center here in Chicago. Definitely a great organization regarding indigenous communities here, so check that out as well. With that, I think I want to explain the this specific screening was one of the awarded screenings of the Cita Previa Chuquimarca open call that we put out earlier in the year, early in January, where we just left it open once the pandemic hit. So of course, like everyone in the art world, we obviously went to the tools that we had on hand and decided to just virtually screen it and then conclude it with this beautiful talk that we have. So yeah, welcome everybody. With that, I think I could give it back to Jose Luis to start the conversation. And yeah, thank you.
So I really just wanted to give the floor to our three artists, to Luíza, Nancy, and Chucho, giving them a chance to kind of explain who they are, what they do, what their practices are. And I'm just going to very briefly describe right now the mission of Cita Previa, to just give a platform for, we know it's a problematic term and we're sort of struggling with our ongoing identity crisis, but what to call artists from Latin America, from the diaspora, from the Caribbean. Latinx is the lumping term that we can maybe agree on, but that's okay if we don't. However, we are really excited to present all of these various artists from across the region. And I'm gonna, again, just let them kind of introduce themselves, take the floor, and describe for the three guest artists your practice, any biographical information that you would like us to know about you and where you're coming from and that. Luíza, would you like to go first?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I'm very glad to be part of this screening series and this panel with my friends Nancy and Chucho. I just briefly wanted to mention that the films we are presenting in this program, they were, we had the chance to further develop them in a class that we took together in the master's course that we were doing with the Professor Renee Green. I just wanted to mention that it was an amazing class, and I'm sure Nancy and Chucho might agree, it helped us a lot to improve the projects and such. I come from Brazil. I moved to the US recently, 2 years ago, to start this master's degree, and I lived most of my life in a town inland of Brazil called Itabirito and another city called Belo Horizonte. And I was originally trained as an architect, and I worked for a couple of years as an architect there between Itabirito and Belo Horizonte, while also experimenting with some artistic works that I was interested in, as like ephemeral installations and interventions in public spaces. And then at some point, I decided that I wanted to shift, and I wanted to put most of my energy in the artistic practices that I was doing. So like in terms of my artwork, I think more broadly, it relates to quotidian life, daily life, memory and ruination, in the sense that I'm very interested in meditating about, thinking about time, passage of time, and how the past is present within our present. And more specifically, I have been researching about hemispheric political philosophy, more specifically how contemporary forms of imperialism take place within the Americas. And for that, I've been investigating the historic and present rise of authoritarianism in Brazil as an instrument for the renovation of capitalism in its times of crisis, and also of colonial Epsteins that we actually never left behind in a way. So yeah, that's mostly it. And in terms of materiality, I work mainly with installations and experimental videos, sculptural objects, and I think the material, like the matter, the material conditions of what I'm working with is one of the main things that informs the way my work takes place. Thank you.
Thank you, Luíza. Thank you, Luíza. We're going to get into some more details about some of the specifics you mentioned, especially the sculptural and the materials and the colonial legacies you're talking about. But I'll give the floor now to Nancy and Chucho.
So I guess I'll go first. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. I see a few familiar faces, and it's really, really nice to see everyone. Yeah, and I just wanted to second what Luíza said about this also being a kind of collaborative kind of engagement and kind of mutually really enriching experience of like making films together. Yeah, so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about me. So my name is Nancy Valladares. I was born in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and I've been living in the US for 13 years now. I did my undergrad at SAIC, so I'm kind of like also from Chicago. And then I just recently finished a program in art, culture, and technology at MIT. And, you know, my practice, I kind of, you know, uses it's a intersection between, you know, botany, anthropology, filmmaking, and then as well as critical plant studies. So I was doing, you know, in my time here in Boston, mostly doing film and then also writing, and then as well as working with archival materials that I was kind of recovering or recuperating from different sources. A lot of my work has to do with these kind of histories of economic botany and these kind of crossings and migrations that occur at various scales that include, you know, plants, microbes, and then, you know, all the sort of critters that kind of travel along with, you know, all these like migrations of movement of matter that have happened over a long period of time. And my interests mainly lied in this kind of intersection that happened between coloniality and these kind of histories of, you know, the, you know, to use a problematic term, the Colombian exchange that occurred was of interest to me. You know, this kind of like idea that there's histories of migration, you know, that were also occurring in tandem, as well as like kind of, you know, alongside this kind of like human, you know, large scale movements and exchanges that were occurring. And so my practice is, you know, I'm a photographer by training and a filmmaker, but I also kind of like do a lot of, you know, sculpture and then still photography, and as well as, you know, sort of like going into starting to like work more with like, plants themselves and plant matter as kind of, co-creators. And so yeah, the work that I've been doing the last 2 years is kind of tracing these botanical histories and exchanges of specific plant species, as well as like recovering these kind of histories that exist in Honduras about, the establishment of agricultural regimes and kind of like monocultural kind of, paradigms of, food growing that kind of spread across the region. And so the film that I'm gonna, present, or that was presented today for the series, is kind of part 2 of a trilogy. And then maybe we could get more into that later. But yeah, I guess I'll pass you over to Chucho.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chucho Ocampo, or Jesus. I am, well, first of all, I want to thank Nancy and Luíza. For me, it's an honor to be with them presenting together. I really admire them, and it's very nice to see our work together. It's very exciting, and because I think there are a lot of intersections, and it's been great to see how things have evolved and how we all kind of intertwine a lot of things, and each and every one of us in its own way, in their own way, just figure out a way of doing, like, landing these films or making a little bit of sense of what we're thinking about. A little bit about me. I'm trained as an architect as well as Luíza. I decided I liked architecture, but I didn't like it that much, like to force myself to work in an office for 14 hours. So as well as architecture, like, has a lot of limitations. So I think art for me was like the obvious step further. And I came to ACT. I'm in my 2nd year right now, Art, Culture, and Technology, same program at MIT. And I have an office back in Mexico. I'm a creative director of Deriv Lab. This is like a multidisciplinary, we call it a lab, not much of an office. We do projects in a very big range of medium and like outcomes. I'm also co-founder of a cultural space in Querétaro, in Mexico, called BEMA, which is also meant for this type of things, like bringing people together, acting as a platform to have this discussion, not from disciplines, but from anywhere we want to, just mixing things. Especially the last 2 years, I think my research has been this strange mix between arts, architecture, and technology, whatever that 3 things mean, and basically trying to take this and revolve it in a way that it kind of doesn't make any sense, as you will be seeing maybe in my film. So big part of my practice has to do with walking or drifting or erring or wandering. And basically what I've been trying to do in the past year or 2 is trying to take this idea of not knowing or the drifting phase of that comes from walking and has a very long heritage towards research and artistic practice and the built environment, and so it has like a lot of other branches. So I work in a multiplicity of media, like from architecture, installation, like public space interventions, and now recently film, sound, multimedia, and like immersive environments. I've been kind of playing around all of this media. So looking forward to talk about the film.
Thank you, all 3 of you, and congratulations are in store, obviously, for you two, Luíza and Nancy, for finishing your programs. So maybe we'll have a little toast for you all. But we know it's difficult, and thank you again for submitting your work to our open call. John and I were just thrilled by all of your work. I like to say that your proposal rose to the top above everyone else's, kind of, not to say anything disparaging about our next screening or the other artists. They're all fantastic, but at least for me as one of the video programmers and curator for Sin Cinta Previa, we just appreciated your variety of themes, the way that everything tied together, the textures of all of your works. And I'm just going to segue into the next sort of questions that we have for you all regarding your proposal and the words that you so eloquently placed together for your works. One of the things that stands out for me is this question of temporalities and timelines of the way that you're engaging, going back and forth with your works from the now to these colonial pasts, these histories. And so the question is, what does disobeying the temporal line of history mean for you all? You don't have to go in order of a presentation. You can switch it up, jump in where you like, but who wants to tackle it first, maybe?
Yeah, so I think actually that was like probably the first kind of common thread that we latched onto. It's this notion that we were all kind of working with, these kind of more deep histories, or, kind of looking at these things that were kind of like threading and interlacing around, these narratives that have kind of been constructed as kind of paradigmatic of like kind of particularly kind of colonial histories. And so I think that in many ways, some of the works were looking at that and complicating, this notion of like what history, how it's being told and how it can be kind of like, stretched or become malleable or porous. And so I definitely think that, for me, it was like a way of subverting, I guess, at least internally, these kind of existing narratives. And in terms of disobedience, I think it just seems like kind of a term or maybe a desire that is very appropriate for the times that we're living. And so in some ways the retelling of history and the disobeying of this, kind of existing paradigms is almost an imperative. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. I think in addition to that, I would also say that I think the way we wrote about our works together is an attempt to speak to the specific, to a specific way of understanding passage of time in history that we are interested in putting light on and be more and more attentive to, which is a conception of history that is determined as a totality, very much based on an idea of progress, and in which history is an ongoing development, right? A straight line ahead, as like ongoing growth is something that is the natural path of history. And this is a discourse from modernity that we understand that maybe freezes and places the responsibility for colonial legacies and maybe a contemporary condition of the global south in that region, in the sense that following a trajectory of progress, everything that is considered to be not an ideal or not a Western mode of living will be one day overcome. So I think in these lines, we are in a way like the disobeying the lines of history is a way of decentering from a dominant conception of history that's not necessarily founded on a totality that's always moving forward, but rather on a way that we can engage in a theory materially with history and propose other histories as well.
Yeah, I think that in my case, of course, I think the three of us, we were talking about this while we were writing and trying to. We knew there was a thread about this within our three films. It comes in different ways, but also while talking about it, it was very interesting to see like how we agreed. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe that like linear telling of history is always biased. No, it's just one side, or it's just one view, which is always like the view that won, or the only one we have. But also, I think in that way, at least how I see it, like disrespecting it means acknowledging that places and things hold like a multiplicity of times and the value and symbols, and even like in common places you can find like an enormous amount of information, an enormous amount of just overlapping ideas that are kind of being there and were sedimented, and we only get like this very basic layer of it. So I think just by standing still in between this crazy fast world, and really looking and taking these different things that maybe don't have much, or at first sight they don't have much to do with themselves, you can create like new threads of information or of understanding, or new fictions even, which I think is super important in the three of the projects in that sense.
So in creating something new with time, or disobeying it, or going backwards and forwards in these ways, I'm just wondering for all three of you too, how your particular materials, the thread that we all kind of saw of, and why we titled the talk, or not the talk, but why we gave the title's introduction song, Some Space, Earth, Wind, and Fire, by Earth, Wind, and Fire, the song by Earth, Wind, and Fire, September, which actually fits with our you know, your materials and the work and all the things that you're doing in the video, and also the fact that we're in September. What do you see, and what do the materials that you engaged, if we can bring them down to some kind of essence, to a material kind of substance, even though you're working in the immaterial in video for this program, what do those materials mean to you, in the sense of earth and wind and fire as essential core elements?
Nancy's looking at me. I think for what I read about, and we talked about this earlier, and it was very beautiful when you said like it's very material. I think like to frame it that way, it's very nice, because I think we have, or we're trying to understand these different ways of looking at material, or these three things, or different attitudes towards the material or the natural, no? Which I think it's super. Like when you contrast it, like, and the attitude towards the natural or the environment or the material changes a lot between the different projects, or the modern project, or like indigenous thought, or how you inhabit a landscape, for example, how you relate to it. So I think the three films have like a very strong relation to those, exactly to that attitude towards material and the natural now.
Yeah, and I also think, maybe kind of echoing off of that, is this idea that it, in some ways, like there are like geological, you know, ecological, atmospheric forces that are kind of driving a lot of these narratives, which I think became kind of like really interesting metaphors, or or like places to kind of like, you know, you know, just looking at those like forces as you know, these kind of like actors or agents that were also kind of present, but whose like kind of stories are very much submerged or like obscured or completely, you know, erased from kind of the way that history has been written is kind of really anthropocentric, like, you know, form. And so in some ways, like fire, for example, in the way that like Chucho's film, you know, is this kind of meditation on fireworks and, you know, this like really interesting way that like gunpowder became like a kind of alchemical slash, you know, economic and political force. And then, right. And Luiza's, you know, like dealing with the, you know, earth and materials and extraction. And then my own work is, you know, like looking at these kind of both atmospheric and botanical kind of like implications of, you know, the travel of like, you know, seeds or specific species across the ocean. So in some ways, like it is a kind of gazing at those like kind of things, although the medium itself is, you know, like it's very, it's film, you know, like it's experimental, but also, yeah.
But Luiza, your work kind of gets a little bit more to the actual material. And if we can stretch the earth, wind, and fire metaphor to include water, then, you know, the ice and how much that kind of the gravity and the weight and the objects that are mined inside the ice in your film lends to this conversation as well, of course. But yeah, how do you feel about the elements and these materials in your work?
I think resonating with what Nancy just said, I think the way that the matter in our works ties together is very much how, like from a very anthropocentric understanding of the world, they've been forms of life as matter have been like commodified, and then they migrate in all our films in a certain way that relates production of capital and how these forms of life are commodified to the way that people have an opportunity to live in relationship to those systems that are enforcing this commodification and migration of forms of life. And I think, I mean, in my work, I would say that the matter that has a bigger centrality is probably the mind fragments of the landscape, and as you mentioned, the way that they interact with the water. And for me, the water in a way works as something that's, I'm not sure if that's the right word in English, but like conducting. It's like allowing the flow and the navigation of things, so to speak. And in a way, when I have the totem with the ice totem with the iron stones inside, for me it's like at the same time that the water probably conducts in a transatlantic trade, for example, and the mind fragments of the landscape travel across the globe and become capital elsewhere, the water in that certain sense holds the stones in the air, and it's melting slowly, probably in a different temporality than this passage of time and understanding of history that we were talking about. So I think I try to look at that in the film both ways. So there are moments in which the iron stones are inside the ice totem, but there are also moments in which a ship made out of iron is traveling over the water and it's crossing to another portion of the planet. So yeah, I think that's it. I don't know, that's my perception, and maybe the feelings that were guiding the production of the weaving of the images of the film. But I think something that we also discussed a lot about is that we don't want to freeze the possibilities of meaning. So we are also very curious to hear what maybe other people understood of it.
Yeah, totally. I don't think that any of your videos are in any way a fixed or solid or stone kind of tablet or anything to say one thing in particular. But that was what was so rich about your work, that we could just watch them and come up with our own meanings and our own interpretations of the work as they unfolded. That they were rich for that. And I'm going to kind of use that as a segue, and this is derailing a little bit from what we maybe wanted to talk about, but if you might interject a little bit with your with how you're outside your practices before coming to MIT, and the work that you had done before might have led to these material investigations, is something that I keep, when I looked at your proposal again before starting the conversation today, and I was looking at your portfolios, I was recalling months and months ago before the pandemic what we saw and the connections that were there before the actual selection and everything happened. But I think that there might be a thread, and I would rather you all perhaps negate that or contest or confirm. But where did your architectural backgrounds and your practices prior lead to these material investigations maybe?
Thank you, Jose Luis, for your very generous comment on that. I mean, that's very hard to answer, I guess. I think water is, in a way, very present. Most of my works, I had water as a form of life that was present in relation to extraction. And I think working, I don't know, working as an architect, you're very driven to materials that you're engaging all the time. That's like the foundation of conceiving anything that you're going to do. So I could see a relationship there. And I think, at least in my case, it's interesting because the film that I presented in the screening, I started to do it in 2018, 2017, before I started at MIT. And when I came here, I expanded and changed the film. So I think that's a work that maybe speaks from, speaks from different times of my trajectory that I did. I started it and then I stopped, and then I went back to it in different times of my work. So I think it maybe shows that. I don't know.
Yeah. So I guess like for me, I think definitely my background in photography was like has always been, I think, this kind of like thing that haunts me in a way. Like I was in the photography department at SAC, and then I was very much, one of the things that I was always really kind of fascinated by was by the apparatuses of image making themselves. So, cameras, or, like all, scanners, or, the film itself is a matter material that also has its own kind of like implications and structures and relationships of power embedded into them. And so the work now, the density of breath was shot using, for example, a really cheap electronic microscope, for example. So I brought this notion that, like, cameras themselves, so like produce certain kind of epistemic, certain epistemes that for me has always been really, really interesting. And so image making technologies and like their kind of like legacies and the things that came before them are essentially, part of like the research and the impetus behind the work and the film. And so in some ways I'm still always constantly looking back to photography, but under this like much more expansive lens, which seeks to not just look at this kind of like really tiny, like what is a 200-year history, but rather a history of the production of like, representations and images as having a much, much longer, span. And so you know, previously, you know, my practice, you know, like I was working a lot with, you know, pinhole cameras, and then film itself is like a kind of like material. And I definitely think that that's still like echoing in my current, you know, practice. It comes and goes, but I think it's still very much there.
I think in my case, I don't know. I have always had like some certain fascinations with things, or like I have seen these structures and fireworks since I was very, very little, and I have always been amazed by them, and I have always have them like rolling in my head, and like that I have a set of things that are always kind of floating around. And obviously a discipline is not enough to explain this or that. Like, no, you cannot put it through architectural discourse because it's horribly boring. And also, and so there's a need of going kind of beyond it and use another medium and another type of research to kind of just collage all of the things that are happening, or are possibly, or the possible meanings that this can have when you just put it against another thing, or like or subject or idea. And that for me has been super liberating, especially coming from architecture, because as I'm saying, like architectural discourse is very, very rigid, and it just kind of goes around itself. And I'm almost sure Luíza agrees with me. So in this way, I think it helped me to break it. So, and to just open it further. And I think film in that way, it's a very nice medium to work with, because you're also kind of editing, you're also kind of building this narrative, but it's so much more, it's more ambiguous, and ambiguous is so nice also.
Yeah, video is my favorite medium. So, you know, I appreciate that you're all venturing into this terrain with us, and helping inaugurate the first features on Sin Cinta Previa's website as an actual archive now, as a living archive that's grown from just highlighting and sharing screening events and cataloging or archiving the photos from the events and the posters and the writing beforehand, to now also feature work on it in this pandemic, in this time. It's really, I feel like, since we're in the screen right now and in the future, and we're kind of breaking temporalities in this moment by knowing that this is going to be recorded, and talking about the recording yesterday or Wednesday. And, you know, it's weird. Making video is a very weird thing. But in that vein of like disrupting temporalities or disobeying them, I want to go back to that question that we had before. We're talking about time specifically, and it was mentioned, a sense of decoloniality or a sense of decolonization, and someone, I forget who, mentioned an imperative. It might have been you, Nancy, that mentioned this kind of need to decolonize our practices, the materials, the worlds, for all of the various obvious reasons, the injustices and the inequities, the racial, the gendered, everything that's happening, and never seems to stop. But I wonder what decolonizing practices or decolonial, not as a metaphor, if we've read that essay, means to you all, to your work.
Maybe I'll maybe give my kind of like quick, but also kind of problematic, I guess, like, or problematizing off the term, right? Like, I definitely think that my kind of like my research emerges from a kind of like, or an attempt at decolonial kind of perspectives, but I've come to, you know, this place where sometimes the term itself doesn't feel enough. I think that there is a kind of this kind of like crossing, or maybe like superimposition of kind of like alterities that I don't think is fully maybe articulated for me quite yet. I'm still trying to understand what that means for me. Like, I definitely think that I'm looking at and gazing at these kind of like paradigms of domination that happen at multiple scales, beyond, you know, just like kind of like the kind of colonial exchange or colonial, you know, like coloniality itself. I think there are, you know, forces that are, you know, kind of pushing and pulling at different scales. And so for me, that like sometimes that term does not feel like enough. And so I'm thinking about these kind of like paradigms of domination, you know, and these kind of like relationships of power as kind of emerging from that, from this kind of decolonial thought. And I'm trying to kind of, you know, grapple with that myself. I don't think I have an answer or like a clear delineation of what it means, but it is a recognition that it's I think necessary, but a term that I think should also be problematized. But
I think for me, I don't know. I don't like to frame, for example, the things I do or the projects or the research merely as a, for example, a decolonizing effort or this sort of things, because also I believe while doing research and while doing while showing these things, also one will have to be a little bit problematic and also be questioning a lot of things, not just like the main structure, but also like it's not a battle about, at least for me, it's not a battle about who is right or wrong, or a battle like for me showing who has the truth or who was right and or who was who. For me, it's this idea of mainly like disobeying or disrespecting the main structure of what we're supposed to think happened, or what is there is this specific set of things that are fixed. For me, it's basically that, like this, just disrespecting, breaking and assembling again, and put them and contrast it. So, and it's also, I mean, for me at least, it's important to try to not go like to one way or the other, to just also observe and to see what happens when you just break and reassemble. And I think that's super important also, like for future projects at least, and like also to move past, or like, no, like, I don't know. Yeah.
I think that's a very, very big question, very important question. And I think I resonating with Nancy, I'm also like constantly thinking about it and like maybe reformulating what is my understanding of that. And I'm very glad that you mentioned the essay, the text that decolonization is not a metaphor, because I truly don't think that we should engage with the colonial practices as like in an attempt of reformism or making society better, or specifically making our institutions better. But decolonization involves like a very profound reshaping of everything, to begin with dismantling our institutions, dismantling nation states, dismantling every institution that endorses capitalism and white supremacy. Like, so it's, I don't like, I wouldn't I wouldn't claim that what we are proposing maybe with our project is a decolonial practice in any sense. I think it's more a shifting of maybe understandings, paradigms of thinking. If that really happens, I think that's our attempt maybe to decenter dominant ways of conceiving the world, not dominant understandings of history, as we mentioned, but I wouldn't really say that it is the colonial. And I think that term or that attitude in relationship to art raises a lot of important questions as well. Like when we are talking within a discipline that comes from an era base like historiography, like what are we understanding as art? How can we move beyond the discourses that define art in the dominant understanding of art as well? So yeah, that's, I think, some thoughts around that I have.
I appreciate all of your interpretations and reinterpretations, your challenge to the ideas of decolonial efforts, you know, because they would imply, not, you know, as the essay goes, an actual uprooting, an actual reciprocity, an actual retaking and giving and restructuring, as you mentioned, of things that are, I don't think you're all right in saying you're expressing your discomfort with the idea of decolonial efforts. That's kind of why I prompted it, right? But I did hear something that really resonated kind of from all three of you as you were describing the work in terms of decentering, shifting, and kind of dismantling as words that if we're talking about like a decolonial practice or something, where it's about deconstruction and thought and structuralism or some other term, then maybe that's what you're all doing, but I can't define that for you. But I definitely see the thread, and I appreciate your work. I think we're going to open it up to some questions, and we might have people that can have already raised their hands in the. No, it's open for people to raise their hand or just jump in if you have a question or comment for Luíza, Nancy, or Chucho, or John and I. John's back from, I don't know where he went, another universe.
No, yeah, I just didn't want to be a distraction while they talk, so I'm like, let me just mute my screen, you know. But yeah, thank you so much for the talk. I mean, this is the time where we could just open up for questions for anybody who has any for the artist. I think for me, well, while we wait for someone to ask a question, or any comments that you have, not necessarily a question, you know, just if you have any comments about the work, like which one was your favorite, why was it your favorite, you know, just general comments for anyone, you know, just putting that out there. But I think I really loved all the three works together, and for me, what I mentioned to you guys the other day was like there was like a thread of opacity, and this thread where like stuff is moving, or like the exchange of transition through like the invisible, I don't want to say invisible hand, but like through the color of opaqueness. I just thought that there's like this interesting thread there, which I still didn't find the words to it. I know I was going to, but I kind of missed on that one. But that was my only comment, really. It was really good seeing all three works together. Hopefully everyone saw it like in the screening, like in their TV or in their big screen TV that everyone has. But we could, if anybody has a question or comment, definitely feel free to hop in. Like unmute your screens too, if you guys want. But if not, we could definitely talk about more of the individual videos, or I don't know if any upcoming projects from you guys, or was this the only project you guys have out right now?
I think Yoshi wanted to ask a question.
Hi. Thank you all for your contributions and for your work and for being here and presenting your work. Yeah, I guess my question is about perhaps the contradiction or the maybe even hypocrisy between the institutions like MIT or like SAIC, who, you know, have perhaps nonprofit status and don't pay property tax, or are property owners in municipal centers, and who support ideologies of decolonization, or who support ideologies of even neo-Marxist philosophies, and yet who enact labor practices or all kinds of practices that are in contradiction to those ideologies, or have boards that won't enforce or won't support those kinds of initiatives. And so how do you reconcile the distance between what an institution might pay lip service to, but what an institution is actually doing through the governance of a board and an endowment and a legacy?
Yoshi, thank you so much for that question. And yes, thank you. It's so good to see you. I think that's a great question. And it's something that, like, as, you know, students and, you know, like multiple institutions, we were grappling with at different kind of levels, but to me, this like kind of notion of reconciling these two things is, I don't think that's it. I don't think it's possible, to be honest with you. I think in many ways which it's part of my discomfort as well with this idea that like institutions, these like, you know, organizations will, you know, utilize like these kind of like, you know, kind of neoliberal framings of like decolonial thought as a way to, you know, front or like, you know, justify everything else that's happening, you know, in the background, the administration. And so, and MIT is very much guilty of that in so many ways. And as students, like, it is a contradiction because our education was funded by, you know, colonialism. It was funded by, you know, weapons manufacturers. And so I don't think that it's a reconciliation. I think it's something that we're kind of gonna have to grapple with for the rest of our, you know, for the rest of our life. But it's at the same time, you know, at the same time, I think, for me, you know, as a researcher, as an artist, as a scholar, I also kind of enjoy this notion of infiltrating and maybe causing a little bit of trouble, maybe to invoke this notion of, you know, Stefano Harvey's and Fred Moulton's kind of undercommons. I think that there are ways of being in institutions and within them, that they're not ideal, they're not perfect, and they never will be. And I don't think that there is a fully, like, or what's the word? Like, I don't know what an ethical, like completely ethical condition would be, or if that is even, you know, like a kind of proposition that should be put out there. I think that in many ways that my desire or my hope was that at least I would produce discomfort or, you know, yeah, you know, like, you know, ask questions, cause a little bit of trouble. Yeah.
For me, it would be, I mean, I see it, I think, more simple terms, maybe for good, maybe for bad, but the idea is use them and take everything you can from them and spread it. And collaborate, take all the money you can, ask all of the grants that you can, use the thing and take it. And also, as Nancy is saying, I think our program is a little bit of a pain in the ass in there because, yeah, like we are the ones that are kind of not making much science, no, or like we are the art program there. So I think we play I think a good role, but also kind of a paradoxical and strange role. So at least how I see it, is just take everything, because also by being in one of these institutions, you learn a lot about how they work and how they operate, and it's like a massive, huge thing.
There's a professor in communications, I believe at MIT, Sasha Costanza Chalk. He's an old friend of mine from middle school, and he is working on some strategies that perhaps they're useful or beneficial or interesting. I don't know. But if you meet him or say hello, you know, say hi for me.
Thank you, Joshi.
Thank you.
And thank you for that question too about these institutions, because you know we've got some backing from one too. So I don't know if we should give a shout out, problematic shout out to the Propeller Fund for funding this and giving us some money to, as you said very eloquently, kind of take that money and run and then spread it around as much as we can. That was kind of our motto, John and I, in getting this open call out into the world and giving some money to some pockets that we appreciate. So thank you all for being here and for that question too. John, did we have any questions? We are just at the hour. We said that it would go for an hour, but of course you can all hang out and chat some more. How are people feeling? Did anybody think of anything or have anything to add in the audience? Or John, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. I think all the points were talked about in the talk. But if anyone has anything else, or I don't know if Nancy, Chucho, Luisa, if you want to say a few more things about your practice, anything, I don't know, while we conclude it, or we could just bookmark it here.
No, we just wanted to thank you both, John and Jose Luis, for all the work that you put into this and for, you know, letting us kind of come aboard. Really, you know, we were really excited about this, and it's, you know, all the work that, you know, like the Chuquimarca and Cinta Previa are doing, and for being, you know, just like, you know, positioning yourself in the way that you do. So we just wanted to thank you for working with us and for being, you know, so supportive and generous.
And
as well.
super kind. Yeah.
Yeah. So shout out.
So much. Muito obrigada. Muchas gracias.
No, I mean, well, thank you guys. I mean, this is why we're doing this, right? We as makers, we all have our ambition or want or need to like make it something for the world, like to gift you, me, family, friends, you know. So I'm very glad that you guys hopped onto the open call. So I guess transparency or like a little background. I met Nancy a long time ago when she was here in SAC, and when I put out the open call, I'm like, oh well, Nancy's here, she's probably not gonna see this. But then like I'm like, oh, it came through. I'm like, wow. But of course, that would have only happened if with the Sin Cinta Previa. Sin Cinta Previa specifically focused on video work. So it's been a nice little what's the word? Nice little process to like think with you guys, make with you guys for a brief second in this pandemic, and as this earth turns, you know. So thank you guys for applying.
Yeah, and I also want to thank, for the record, of course, our jurors who are not present today, but Malia Haynes Stewart and Giselle Mira Diaz, who were part of the committee here to help select the work too. So full transparency there. If you're not aware of and know the wonderful work that Filmfront does, their programming has been a big part of like kind of elevating this platform for Sin Cinta Previa. And as it's been a journey for 2 years. Obviously, thanks for John for all the love and support too. Chuquimarca is really cool. If nobody knows about it, check out Chuquimarca for any newcomers. And also, if you can, check out our website, cincintaprevia.com, to look at the videos if you haven't seen them yet. They're going to be up indefinitely. We don't have contracts and things. We're not official like that, so it could be there forever. But if without further ado, I mean, unless anyone else has something else to add or think something they want to say, then now might be a good time to wrap it up. Keep it nice, short and sweet, right?
Thank you, everyone.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all. That concludes our talk. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.